Jack Hayes had always been fascinated by languages that no one else could understand. As a systems linguist, he spent his days piecing together fragments of communication from civilizations humans barely knew existed. When he received the assignment to join a joint human expedition to a distant star corridor, he knew this was the kind of mission that could change everything. The station orbiting the neutral planet seemed quiet at first, but the air was thick with anticipation. Humans and aliens alike were walking in calculated steps, each measuring the other carefully. Jack could feel the tension in his chest. It was not just a political meeting. There was something more, something unseen. He had studied the archives, listened to recordings, and gone through signals that were years old, trying to learn something about the rulers of this ancient empire. Almost nothing had survived. Almost everyone who had met the alien princess before had forgotten her name. Jack was determined not to be like everyone else. He entered the main hall with cautious excitement. The walls were curved and made of a smooth, metallic material that reflected the light in strange patterns. Human delegates were settling into their assigned seats, while alien observers watched from balconies above. Jack felt a strange mix of curiosity and nervousness as he scanned the room. Then he saw her. Alira stepped forward, her presence commanding attention without force. There was a quiet dignity in the way she moved, an elegance that seemed effortless. She wore a robe of shimmering colors that seemed to shift as she moved. Jack's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time he had seen her in person, but he had studied every signal, every fragment he could find. He knew what her voice sounded like. Even the way she emphasized certain syllables when speaking. The meeting began, and translations hummed through devices. Alira's voice was calm but firm. She spoke about the star corridor, the history of her people, and the responsibilities of her position. Most humans kept their eyes on the floor or their notes, afraid of looking too interested. Jack, however, found himself paying attention to every detail, every inflection. When she paused to take a breath, he felt a sudden urge to speak. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind, but never had he felt it so intensely. Leaning slightly forward, he quietly said her name, the one syllable perfectly remembered from old signals. Alira. The hall went still. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, devices hummed in silence, and every eye turned toward him. Alira's expression shifted from mild curiosity to shock. She blinked, as though she could not believe what she had just heard. Jack felt the weight of the silence pressing on him, but he did not flinch. He had said her name, and in that simple act, he had connected to something almost forgotten. She took a step back, clearly unsettled. Whispers rippled through the alien delegates. No human had ever spoken her name correctly, let alone remembered it. For centuries, her people had reduced royalty to titles, erasing individual identity from history. Yet here was a human who had found a way to preserve what others had lost. Jack met her eyes, silently conveying respect and sincerity. She did not yet understand him, but something had shifted. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice softer now, tinged with curiosity rather than authority. "How do you know my name?" The question was simple, but it carried the weight of disbelief. Jack cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. He explained that humans had a habit of documenting everything, even voices that others had dismissed. They remembered details that others ignored, because every story, every person, mattered. He told her that he had found traces of her name in ancient archives, signals that had been lost to time but preserved quietly by humans who could not forget. Jack's voice did not carry pride. It carried honesty, simple truth that humans often held onto what others abandoned. Alira Singlequote's eyes softened, though she remained cautious. She had always been taught to treat humans as unpredictable and loud, capable of destroying without thought. Yet here was one who had done the opposite. He had listened, learned, and remembered. She felt a strange warmth, as if a veil had lifted, revealing a world she had never known existed. Humans were different, she realized. They could honor memory in a way her own people had forgotten. The meeting continued, but the mood had changed. Alira's attention seemed to linger on Jack, and other humans noticed the difference too. She asked more questions, lingering on details that others would have skipped. Jack responded with care, speaking not just with his mind, but with his humanity. The aliens were wary, but they could sense the sincerity in his actions. Even though the negotiations were about the Star Corridor and political agreements, the underlying story was about understanding, recognition, and respect. After the formal discussions, Jack found himself walking beside Alira in the corridor. The walls glowed softly, and the floor hummed under their feet. She was quiet at first, as if weighing whether to trust him. Finally, she asked about his motivations. He told her that humans believed in remembering those who were forgotten. It was not a matter of politics or power. It was simply a matter of decency. Jack explained that even across the stars, even among strangers, every person's story mattered. Alira listened, her expression thoughtful. She had never heard such words before, especially directed at her personally. She had lived a life where her identity was secondary to her title. Yet here was someone who saw her not as a ceremonial figure, but as a person. The quiet connection they formed in that moment was subtle but powerful. Jack knew he had not changed the world, and Alira knew that much could still be lost. But the act of remembering had created a bridge between two species. Humans did not conquer simply by force or strategy. They conquered in the way they cared, in the way they refused to let stories vanish. Alira realized that perhaps humans were more dangerous than she had believed. Not because of weapons, but because they could see, remember, and honor what others erased as the day ended and delegates returned to their quarters. Jack sat alone for a moment, reflecting on what had happened. He had come to the stars expecting duty, perhaps adventure, but not the profound moment of recognition he had just experienced. The memory of her shocked face, the quiet room, and the ripple of whispers among the alien delegates stayed with him. This was why humans remembered. This was why stories survived. This was why names mattered. Alira, in her own quarters, replayed the encounter over and over. The sound of her name on human lips echoed in her mind. She realized that for the first time in centuries, she had been seen not as a title, not as a symbol, but as herself. A strange mixture of fear, gratitude, and curiosity filled her. She wondered what other forgotten things humans might remember, what other truths they might uncover if she let them. The princess, who had once been distant and ceremonial, felt a subtle shift inside her. Humans were unpredictable, perhaps even reckless, but there was a kindness in the way they held on to the past. As Jack prepared for sleep, he thought about the long journey ahead. Negotiations, politics, and star systems would continue to challenge them, but he knew something important had been achieved. In a galaxy where names were often lost, where individuals vanished behind titles and history, he had restored a fragment of memory. Alira's name, carried in his mind and spoken aloud, would survive now. And in that survival, something greater was born, a connection that might one day change more than just the corridors of stars. Humanity's strength lay not in domination, but in remembrance. And Jack had just shown the first spark of that truth in the heart of an alien princess. Alira could not stop thinking about the human who had spoken her name. The quiet, sincere way he had done it, without arrogance or expectation, lingered in her mind. She had spent centuries living in a world where her name was almost meaningless, where titles replaced identity and tradition erased individuality. Yet here was a human who had remembered, who had honored her existence as a person rather than a role. She wanted to understand him, to understand why humans acted this way. It was unusual, and it made her both curious and cautious. The next morning, she requested a private meeting with Jack. He arrived to find her standing by a window overlooking the expanse of space, her robes catching the soft light. She did not speak immediately. Her eyes were fixed on a distant star, as if seeking answers from somewhere far away. Jack waited, feeling the tension in the room, but also a strange calm. He knew this moment was delicate, but he also knew that humans had a gift for patience and observation. Finally, Alira spoke. "Why did you say my name?" "No one else has ever done that. No one else ever remembers." Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, but it carried the weight of centuries of silence. Jack looked at her and smiled gently. He explained that humans had a habit of noticing what others ignore. They listened carefully, recorded diligently, and refused to let voices disappear. Every person, every story mattered to them. For humans to forget was almost a crime against memory. He told her that even though the galaxy was vast, even though civilizations rose and fell, humans tried to remember what others had abandoned. Alira studied him closely. She had been trained to be wary of humans, to assume that their kindness was a form of manipulation. But there was honesty in his eyes, a simple truth that she had never encountered before. She asked him how he had learned her name, expecting some grand or deceptive explanation. Jack smiled and said it was the result of careful study, listening to old signals, preserving fragments of history that others had discarded. It was not magic or trickery. It was simple human persistence. Alira's curiosity grew. She began asking questions about humans, about their society, their values, and their strange habit of remembering the forgotten. Jack answered patiently, explaining that humans believed identity was important because it connected them to one another. Every person had a story that deserved to be known, and humans felt responsible for keeping those stories alive. It was not about politics or power. It was about decency, respect, and empathy. The hours passed quickly as they talked. Alira realized that humans were not just unpredictable or loud as her people often assumed. They were careful observers, listeners, and chroniclers. Jack shared stories of humans who had saved histories, remembered lost languages, and honored individuals from alien worlds even when no one else cared. Alira began to see a pattern in their behavior. Humans had a quiet strength, not in force or conquest, but in memory and understanding. Meanwhile, rumors of the human who remembered the princess began to spread among the alien delegates. Whispers carried through the station corridors, carrying a mix of admiration and fear. Some could not understand why a human would care about a name, about history, about one person. Others began to question their own traditions, wondering why they had erased individuality in the first place. Alira, however, focused on Jack. She wanted to know if he truly understood the importance of names, not just in her society, but in every culture he encountered. Over the next few days, their conversations deepened. Alira shared details about her upbringing, the expectations placed upon her, and the burdens of ceremonial life. Jack listened carefully, never interrupting, offering small insights only when appropriate. He spoke of human families, of the ways they preserved memories, of the importance of telling stories and honoring the past. He described how humans sometimes risked everything to save forgotten histories, believing that memory itself was a form of power. Alira found herself fascinated. Humans were dangerous in a way she had not realized. They could see what others overlooked, and they acted upon it. One evening, as the station glowed under the light of distant suns, Alira confided in Jack about her fears. She feared losing herself to tradition, becoming nothing more than a symbol, a title stripped of meaning. Jack responded with a simple truth. The act of remembering someone gives them life beyond ceremony, beyond expectation. He told her that her name was more than a word. It was a recognition of her existence. It was a way to honor her as a person, not just a figurehead. Alira felt a strange comfort, as if someone finally understood her in a way her own people never had. Their connection grew, not as a romance, but as a deep understanding between two beings from different worlds. Alira began to see humans as more than visitors or negotiators. She saw them as caretakers of memory, keepers of stories, and witnesses to truths that others ignored. Jack, in turn, respected her courage and wisdom. He admired her ability to rule, to bear responsibility, and yet still question the world around her. Together, they shared a silent understanding in a galaxy that often forgot. Remembering was a kind of rebellion. As discussions about the Star Corridor continued, Alira started to observe human behavior more closely. She noticed how they recorded details others missed, how they listened to voices long silenced, and how they valued individual identity. It was unlike anything she had encountered in her own society. Jack's presence reminded her constantly that memory was power. It was a power humans wielded without violence, simply by choosing to see and honor what others disregarded. Then, a subtle shift occurred in the alien delegation. Some began to question the traditions that had erased individuality for centuries. They wondered if humans were right, if there was value in remembering names, stories, and histories. Alira could see the tension between the old ways and the possibility of change. She realized that Jack's simple act of saying her name had started something far bigger than either of them anticipated. It was not a threat or a declaration of power, it was a spark of awareness that could alter the course of her people. One night, Alira walked through the quiet corridors of the station, reflecting on everything she had learned. The weight of her ceremonial life felt lighter somehow. She understood that her identity mattered, that her name had meaning, and that humans could show her a way to preserve it. Jack's approach had been gentle, patient, and unassuming, yet its impact was profound. She realized that humans had a unique strength, the ability to see, remember, and act with empathy across the galaxy. As the expedition continued, Alira began to trust Jack more. She sought his advice on matters beyond diplomacy, seeking his perspective on history, culture, and the value of memory. Jack responded with humility, never claiming superiority, only sharing what he knew and encouraging her to see the importance of her own experiences. In this exchange, both learned from each other. Alira understood that human strength lay not in weapons or strategy, but in the care they took to remember and honor every individual. Jack learned that even the most distant and ceremonial beings could find value in human ways of seeing and preserving history. Alira also began to question her own society's approach to identity. She wondered how many lives had been overlooked, how many names had been forgotten, and how much knowledge had vanished because her people valued tradition over remembrance. She began to see the potential for change, inspired by the simple act of being remembered by a human. She realized that preserving her name was not just for herself, it could be a small step toward awakening her society to the importance of memory and individuality. Jack, in turn, reflected on the fragility and beauty of memory. He had encountered civilizations that treated history as disposable, voices as unimportant, and names as mere labels. Yet in Alira, he saw the possibility of bridging worlds through understanding and recognition. The connection they had formed, built on respect and the act of remembering, came a quiet rebellion against forgetfulness. It was subtle, invisible to those who valued only titles and power. Yet powerful enough to change perspectives, the days turned into weeks. And negotiations continued, but the focus was no longer solely on the Star Corridor. The human habit of remembering had planted seeds of awareness among the alien delegation. Whispers of curiosity, admiration, and caution spread. Alira's own perception of humans shifted from suspicion to respect. Realizing that their true power lay in what they remembered and how they honored it, she understood that the act of recognition could be more influential than any weapon, more enduring than any decree. One evening, as the stars shimmered outside the station windows, Alira stood quietly, thinking of Jack. She understood now why humans valued memory so deeply. It was not about pride or superiority. It was about empathy, connection, and the refusal to let anyone or anything vanish into oblivion. She felt a sense of hope, knowing that her own identity, once at risk of being forgotten, was now secure in the recognition of another species. And she knew that this moment, this understanding, could inspire broader change if only others were willing to listen. Jack, unaware of the full impact of his actions, continued his work, documenting, observing, and listening. He had not intended to make history or shift societies. He simply acted according to human instincts. Yet the result was undeniable. Alira had begun to see herself not as a title, but as a person, and her society was beginning to question the erasure of identity. Humanity's habit of remembering had planted the first seeds of transformation, a subtle but lasting influence that could ripple across worlds. In this quiet, human-centric way, the galaxy began to learn that power was not always in strength or control, it was in remembering, honoring, and seeing one another as more than symbols or roles. The calm of the station was broken one morning by an unexpected alert. Jack was in his quarters when the alarms echoed through the halls, a low, vibrating hum that set everyone on edge. Alira had been in a meeting with her advisors, discussing trade and travel through the star corridor when the message reached them. The ancient defense system, long dormant, had activated near the corridor. Its sensors identified royalty by title only, ignoring individual identity. And it had registered the movement of Alira and her delegation. The system was designed centuries ago to enforce order, but it had no recognition of personal identity. It saw Alira only as a title, as a ceremonial figure, and considered her unauthorized presence. This could endanger her life and destabilize the region. Jack and the human team quickly gathered in the command center, assessing the situation. The defense system was massive, automated, and built by an alien civilization that had deliberately erased personal identity for control. It did not negotiate or reason. It operated on a binary system. Recognized titles were allowed, unrecognized or unauthorized figures were neutralized. Jack realized that this was unlike any political challenge he had faced. It was not about persuasion or diplomacy. The system would not recognize Alira unless it could confirm her as an individual, not just a role. Alira joined them in the control room, her usual calm replaced by tension. She understood that this ancient system could decide the fate of her people and the corridor in an instant. Jack observed her closely, noting how the princess, who had been shocked by the memory of her name, faced the potential of being erased from history entirely. He had an idea, but it was risky. He explained that the key to overriding the system was to prove individual identity. It required more than titles. It needed recognition of personal memory, the confirmation that Alira existed as a person and not just as a symbol. Other humans, including Ben Carter and Amy Lewis, joined the discussion. They brainstormed ways to feed the system with personal information about Alira, her voice patterns, her history, and the name that humans had preserved quietly over decades. Jack emphasized that the name itself held power. The system could process signals from the archives, confirming identity if it recognized the exact personal information. It was dangerous, because any mistake could trigger defense measures. Yet it was the only way to protect the princess and maintain peace in the star. Corridor.Alira listened and realized the significance of being remembered. Centuries of tradition had reduced her to a title, erasing personal identity from history. Now, the very act of reclaiming her name and history could save her life. It was an uncomfortable realization that survival depended not on military strength or ceremonial authority, but on personal recognition. She had never thought of memory as power, but here it was, tangible and life-saving. Jack coordinated with the team to compile every fragment of information they had about Alira. They accessed ancient archives, recordings, and human-preserved signals. Each piece, each voice clip, each notation of her name and life's history was critical. Humans worked meticulously, understanding that their patience and attention to detail could make the difference between life and death. The aliens watched, skeptical but intrigued. This method of relying on memory, recognition, identity was entirely foreign to them. Meanwhile, Alira shared details from her own life that had never been recorded. She recounted childhood memories, moments of solitude, and experiences that her people had considered irrelevant to history. Jack carefully logged every word, knowing that the human habit of remembering could serve as a shield. He explained to her that each story, each detail, strengthened the system's ability to recognize her as an individual rather than a ceremonial figure. For the first time, Alira felt that her existence mattered beyond politics or tradition. The human team devised a plan to transmit these personal records to the defense system in a secure format. Jack would narrate the story of Alira's life while the archives played, combining voice recognition, historical data, and the exact spelling and pronunciation of her name. It was a delicate operation, and any error could trigger the system to respond as if an unauthorized figure were present. Every second counted, and the tension in the command room was palpable. Alira watched Jack as he prepared for the transmission. She realized that he did not seek glory or recognition. He simply believed that memory and identity were sacred. It was a quiet, human-centric approach, relying not on force, but on understanding and care. She felt a mix of admiration and trust. Here was a human who honored her existence not for politics or negotiation, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The transmission began. Jack spoke steadily, articulating every syllable of her name while the system processed the archival data. The defense system scanned, matched, and analyzed. Seconds stretched into minutes as the room held its collective breath. The system's response was unpredictable, but Jack and the team remained calm, knowing that humans excelled at patience and attention to detail. Slowly, the system recognized the signals. It acknowledged the individual behind the title. Alira was not just a ceremonial figure. She was a living being with a personal identity preserved across time by human effort. The alerts ceased, and the immediate danger passed. Relief flooded the room, but Jack and Alira both understood that this was more than a technical victory. It was a demonstration of the unique human strength, the ability to see, remember, and honor what others had discarded. The alien delegates were stunned. They had relied on titles, protocols, and rigid enforcement for centuries. Now they've witnessed humans using memory and personal recognition to achieve what their systems of authority could not. Alira realized that her people's traditions, while ancient and revered, had left them vulnerable to forces that did not understand identity. Humans, in contrast, had turned memory into a protective power. Alira and Jack spent hours afterward discussing the implications. She expressed gratitude, not just for saving her life, but for teaching her a lesson about the value of remembrance. Jack, in turn, shared insights about human culture, explaining that memory was a form of responsibility, a way of connecting across generations and species. He emphasized that honoring others, even those from distant worlds, was an instinct that humans valued deeply. It was not about domination or strategy. It was about caring enough to remember over the following days. Alira observed changes in her own perception and in her delegation. She realized that humans' insistence on recording and preserving history had ripple effects far beyond the immediate moment. By safeguarding her identity, Jack had demonstrated the potential for humans to influence not through force, but through understanding. The alien delegation began to question their own traditions and the reliance on impersonal authority. Alira recognized that perhaps her people could learn from humans, focus on memory and individuality. The crisis with the defense system also strengthened the bond between Alira and Jack. It was not a bond of romance, but of mutual respect and understanding. She appreciated that he had risked much to protect her life without seeking recognition or reward. Jack admired her courage and openness, seeing in her the potential to bridge cultural divides. Together, they had demonstrated a quiet form of human strength, the ability to honor life, identity, and history in the face of rigid and impersonal systems. As negotiations resumed, Alira approached the discussions with a renewed sense of perspective. She no longer saw herself merely as a title or symbol. She understood that her identity mattered, not only for her own survival, but for the example it could set among her people. Humans, through their attention to detail, patience, and respect for individuality, had shown her a new way to value and protect what was important. She began to speak in ways that emphasized personal experience, recounting her own memories rather than relying solely on tradition. This subtle shift captured the attention of both human and alien delegates. Reshaping the tone of dialogue around the star corridor, Jack reflected on the events with a quiet satisfaction. He had not set out to change history or influence alien traditions, but the human habit of remembering had made a tangible difference. In a galaxy where titles often overshadowed individuals, humans' focus on identity and memory created a unique and lasting impact. Alira's life was preserved, the crisis averted. The seed of change had been planted in the hearts of her people. The experience left a lasting impression on Alira. She recognized that humans could wield power not through conquest or coercion, but through the care they took to observe, remember, and honor others. She began to question how her society might integrate this philosophy, how memory and recognition could strengthen, rather than weaken, tradition. She understood that Jack's actions were not extraordinary in the human sense. They were simply a reflection of a culture that valued every individual. Every story and every name, the defense system incident became a turning point. Alira realized that being remembered had tangible consequences, that memory could protect life, influence decisions, and inspire change. Jack had shown her that human strength was rooted in empathy and persistence, that their dedication to honoring the past gave them a power that was subtle but profound. As she considered the future, she understood that identity and memory could become tools for survival and progress. Reshaping the galaxy in quiet but meaningful ways, Alira's confidence grew. She began to embrace her own identity with renewed determination, no longer confined by the ceremonial limitations imposed by her culture. Jack continued to support her, offering guidance rooted in human values of remembrance and respect. Together, they navigated the challenges of diplomacy and interstellar politics, demonstrating that humanity's greatest strength was not in weapons or strategy, but in the simple act of seeing and honoring one another as individuals. The lessons of the defense system and the power of being remembered would echo far beyond this mission, leaving a lasting mark on both humans and aliens alike. Alira sat quietly in the observation chamber, looking out at the endless stars. The events of the past days weighed heavily on her mind, but she also felt a sense of hope. The defense system crisis had shown her something she had never truly understood, that being remembered mattered more than titles, ceremonies, or traditions. It was not enough to be a symbol. To survive and thrive, she needed to be recognized as a person, not just a princess. Jack entered the chamber, carrying a datapad filled with archives, voice recordings, and old communications. He did not speak immediately, letting Alira gather her thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and gentle. He explained that the next step was delicate. The defense system might have been neutralized for now, but long-term protection required her full reclamation of identity. She could not rely on secrecy or avoidance. The system would only recognize her if she publicly acknowledged her personal history, her name, and her life as more than a ceremonial title. Alira listened, her heart pounding. She had never considered defying tradition so openly. In her society, royalty rarely used personal names in public, and to do so was considered a breach of etiquette. Yet the thought of allowing herself to remain unseen, unremembered, made her uneasy. Jack's words were simple but profound. Being remembered could be powerful, life-saving, and transformative. The act of reclaiming her name was not rebellion. It was survival and truth over the next few hours. They worked together to organize the information needed to prove her identity. Jack guided Alira in recounting her life experiences, teaching her how to speak her personal history in a way that the system could recognize and accept. He emphasized sincerity, clarity, and detail. The archives, carefully compiled by humans over years, provided evidence of her identity, recordings of her voice, preserved fragments of her life, and even subtle cues in tone and phrasing that were unique to her. Jack explained that humans had a knack for noticing such details and preserving them, and that this attention to memory could be as important as any weapon. Alira began to understand the depth of human values. They did not rely on force or intimidation. They relied on care, observation, and the meticulous preservation of identity. Jack's approach was patient, deliberate, and deeply respectful. It was not about power or politics. It was about ensuring that Alira, as an individual, existed in the system's understanding and in the memory of others. She felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. The act of speaking her name publicly, of reclaiming her identity, was terrifying but necessary. The human team, including Amy Lewis and Ben Carter, assisted by preparing a secure transmission of Alira's personal history to the station's communication networks. They combined audio recordings, historical documents, and live narration from Jack. The goal was to create a comprehensive record that could be recognized by both the defense system and alien observers. Alira realized that this was not just about her survival. It was about showing her people the power of memory and the importance of being seen. Jack reminded her that every story mattered, and that humans had a habit of preserving even the smallest details that others might overlook. As the day of the public reclamation approached, Alira felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve. She walked through the corridors of the station, aware of the eyes of both human and alien delegates upon her. She understood that her actions were unprecedented, that she was challenging centuries of tradition simply by asserting her personal identity. Yet she also understood the stakes. The defense system still operated beyond the station, and her survival depended on being recognized as a person, not just a title. Jack stayed close, offering quiet guidance and reassurance. He did not seek recognition. He simply believed in the importance of preserving her identity. He reminded her that humans had always valued the act of remembering, that their culture relied on the care and attention paid to individuals and their stories. Alira felt a sense of calm, knowing that she was not alone. She was supported by beings who understood the significance of names, memory, and individuality. The moment arrived. Alira stepped onto the observation deck, addressing the assembly and the communication systems simultaneously. Her voice was clear, firm, and filled with the weight of personal truth. She spoke her name, recounted her life experiences, and shared memories that had been long overlooked by her own society. Jack transmitted the archived data alongside her live narration, ensuring that the defense system and observers could match the personal details to the preserved records. Every syllable, every inflection, every detail mattered. As the system processed the transmission, the alerts ceased. The defense mechanisms recognized Alira as an individual, a living person with a personal history that had been preserved across time. The tension in the room eased, and Alira felt a profound sense of relief. It was not just a technical victory. It was a validation of identity, a triumph of memory over erasure. The act of speaking her name and reclaiming her history had transformed the perception of her role and her personhood. The alien delegates were astonished. They had long relied on titles, protocols, and ceremonies to define authority. Now they witnessed the power of personal recognition and the influence of memory. Alira realized that her society had been vulnerable not because of external threats, but because of its failure to preserve and honor individual identities. Jack had demonstrated that humans wielded strength in subtle, human-centric ways, through attention, care, and remembrance. Alira reflected on the lessons she had learned. Being remembered was not just about survival. It was about shaping culture, influencing decisions, and inspiring change. Humans had shown her that memory could be more powerful than weapons, more enduring than authority. The act of reclaiming her identity had altered not only her perception of herself, but also the perception of those around her. The implications were profound, and Alira understood that the galaxy could change if memory and individuality were valued. In the days that followed, Alira embraced her personal identity with confidence. She no longer relied solely on titles or tradition to define herself. She shared her experiences, memories, and perspectives openly, setting an example for her people. Jack continued to support her, providing guidance rooted in human values of remembrance and respect. Together, they demonstrated that power could be subtle, human-centric, and rooted in empathy. The act of being seen had lasting effects. Alira noticed that her people began to question the rigid traditions that had previously erased individual identity. Discussions about memory, recognition, and personal history emerged among delegates, inspired by the human approach. Jack observed these changes quietly, recognizing that the habit of remembering could ripple across cultures and influence entire societies without force or coercion. Humanity's strength lay not in domination, but in the care and attention paid to individuals and their stories. Alira also felt a personal transformation. She was no longer defined solely by her role as princess. She had reclaimed her identity, her name, and her history, and in doing so, she had shown others the power of recognition. The experience had taught her that memory was a form of protection, a source of influence, and a way to connect across generations and cultures. Jack's human perspective had illuminated the importance of these values, and she understood that they could guide her people toward a more aware and compassionate future. As the station returned to its routine, Alira and Jack continued their work bridging human and alien understanding. The transmission of her personal history had not only neutralized the defense system, but also demonstrated the subtle, transformative power of human memory. Alira felt a sense of gratitude, respect, and responsibility. She had been seen, remembered, and validated. And she knew that this experience would shape her actions and decisions for years to come. Jack reflected on the events with quiet satisfaction. He had not sought fame or recognition. He had simply acted according to human instincts. Yet the impact was undeniable. Alira's identity was preserved. The defense system neutralized, and the ripple of change had begun among her people. Humanity's habit of remembering, of valuing individuals and their stories, has proven to be a unique and powerful influence. The galaxy had witnessed that strength could be rooted in empathy, attention, in the simple act of seeing and honoring others. The experience left Alira with a profound sense of possibility. She realized that identity and memory could be tools for shaping the future, protecting life, and inspiring transformation. Jack's human-centric approach had shown her that being remembered was more than personal survival. It was a force for cultural evolution. Together, they had demonstrated that strength could be subtle, quiet, and deeply human, and that memory could change the course of events in ways that force or authority never could. The Star Corridor had never felt so alive. After the events with the defense system and the public reclamation of her identity, Alira walked through the station with a renewed sense of confidence and purpose. The whispers of curiosity and admiration followed her, but she no longer felt constrained by them. She had spoken her name, reclaimed her personal history, and demonstrated the power of being seen. The experience had changed not just her, but those around her, and the lessons she had learned would echo far beyond the station. Jack walked beside her, observing quietly. He had always known that humans had a unique way of interacting with the galaxy. But seeing the impact on Alira and her people reinforced the truth. Humanity's strength lay not in force or strategy, but in remembrance, empathy, and attention to detail. Every name, every story, every individual mattered. He knew that by helping Alira reclaim her identity, they had created a ripple that could influence generations to come. Alira reflected on how much she had learned from humans. She realized that her society had long valued tradition over memory. In doing so, had lost the connection to what made people truly alive. Humans, on the other hand, had a habit of preserving voices, honoring history, remembering those who might otherwise be forgotten. This simple, human-centric approach had not only saved her life, but it also inspired change. She could feel the difference in the station, in the delegation, and in herself. She had been seen, and she knew she would never be forgotten. Negotiations resumed with a new sense of respect and understanding. Alira no longer approached the discussions as a ceremonial figure, but as a person with her own voice and perspective. She shared her experiences openly, emphasizing the importance of memory, identity, and individuality. The alien delegates, influenced by the demonstration of human values, began to listen differently. They asked questions, considered ideas, and even reflected on their own traditions. Jack observed silently, knowing that the subtle power of humans was at work. Alira also began to make small but significant changes within her own society. She encouraged others to reclaim personal histories, to value memory, and to see beyond titles and ceremonies. The ripple effect of Jack's and the human team's actions was spreading, creating an awareness that individuality and recognition were strengths, not weaknesses. She could sense the curiosity growing among her people, a willingness to see the importance of being remembered and honored. One evening, Alira stood in the observation chamber, looking out at the stars. Jack joined her, and they shared a quiet moment of reflection. She expressed her gratitude not only for saving her life, but for teaching her about the subtle yet powerful influence of humans. Jack smiled, modest as ever, saying that humans simply hated letting stories disappear. It was not heroism. It was a habit, a way of being. Alira felt the truth of it deeply. This was a philosophy that could reshape not just her society, but the galaxy itself. The days that followed were filled with work and reflection. Alira continued to reclaim her identity, speak her name, and share her personal history. Jack and the human team documented her experiences carefully, ensuring that the records would persist. Together, they created a bridge between species, showing that respect for individuality and memory could foster cooperation and understanding in ways that force or politics never could. The station, once tense and rigid, now buzzed with a sense of possibility and hope. Alira began to notice changes in her people. Discussions that had once been formal and impersonal now included personal perspectives and memories. Delegates who had once relied solely on tradition began to value the act of remembering, realizing that history and identity were intertwined. Jack's simple human-centric approach had planted seeds that could grow into lasting change. Alira felt a sense of responsibility to nurture this growth, knowing that memory could guide her people toward a more thoughtful and compassionate future. The human team prepared to depart, their mission complete. Alira stood at the docking bay, watching as the ships readied for departure. She felt a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and inspiration. Jack approached, quiet as always, offering a final word of encouragement. He reminded her that memory and recognition were gifts humans valued deeply, and that she now possessed the ability to carry that understanding forward. Alira nodded, feeling the weight and significance of his words. As the ships departed, Alira reflected on what the galaxy had learned about humans. They were not powerful because of weapons or domination. They were influential because they remembered. They valued individuality, honored history, and preserved identities. Their subtle, patient, and human-centric approach had altered perspectives, influenced societies, and shown that even the smallest acts of remembrance could have profound consequences. Alira realized that humanity's true strength was invisible, enduring, and transformative. She returned to her duties with a renewed sense of purpose. She embraced her personal identity fully, sharing her experiences and encouraging others to do the same. The lessons learned from humans were not just practical, they were philosophical. Memory, recognition, and individuality were tools for change, understanding, and connection. Alira understood that the act of remembering could influence the course of events, shape cultures, and protect lives. It was a quiet but undeniable power. Alira also understood that her own life was now inseparable from the values humans had shown her. She would carry these lessons forward, ensuring that her people did not forget the importance of memory and recognition. Jack had shown her that humans had the ability to honor life in ways that transcended force, titles, or tradition. Their influence was subtle, but lasting. And Alira felt privileged to have witnessed it firsthand, as months passed. The ripple effects of the human-centric approach became more evident. Her people began to reconsider traditions that had erased individual identity. Discussions about memory, recognition, and personal history grew more common. Delegates shared stories, remembered the forgotten, and began to see the value of honoring individuals. Alira felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that her personal journey, supported by humans, had initiated meaningful change. She understood that humans had not just saved her life, they had given her the tools to shape the future. Jack and the human team, while departing, left behind more than records and data. They left behind a philosophy, a subtle influence that emphasized the importance of memory, recognition, and individuality. Alira and her people began to integrate these values into their daily lives, governance, and culture. The galaxy, too, began to recognize that humans wielded a unique and enduring power, the ability to honor, remember, and preserve the stories of all beings. Alira, standing on the observation deck one last time before the humans departed, felt a profound sense of connection. She knew she would never forget the lessons she had learned, the care and attention humans had shown, and the importance of reclaiming her name and identity. She realized that memory was not just a personal strength, it was a cultural, societal, and interstellar force. Humans had demonstrated this quietly, with patience and empathy, and the impact would resonate for generations, as the stars stretched endlessly before her. Alira understood the lasting lesson. Power did not always come from force, authority, or tradition. It came from the simple, human-centric act of seeing, remembering, and honoring individuals. Humanity's influence was subtle, enduring, and transformative, and she was now a living testament to it. Her life, her name, and her story would continue to inspire her people and remind the galaxy that to remember was to empower, to protect, and to change the world. With that understanding, Alira embraced her role fully, not as a ceremonial figure, but as an individual with identity, history, and the power of memory. She knew that humans would depart, but the lessons they left behind would endure. The galaxy had learned something profound about humanity, and Alira had learned something profound about herself. She would never be forgotten again. And in that remembrance, she had found strength, purpose, and the quiet but undeniable influence that humans carried wherever they went. The galaxy was shifting quietly, and Alira could feel it. Since the humans had departed, whispers of change had spread through the station and across nearby systems. Delegates who once relied solely on titles now began to ask about personal histories, individual experiences, and the stories of those long forgotten. The simple human-centric act of remembering had created a ripple effect far beyond what Alira had imagined. She walked through the corridors with a sense of anticipation. Realizing that the galaxy was beginning to learn a new kind of strength, Jack had returned briefly to check on the long-term records of Alira's society, ensuring that the archives of her personal history were secure and accessible. He explained that humans believed in preserving identity, not just for the present, but for the future. Even small details, even minor stories, could have powerful consequences when remembered. Alira listened, absorbing every word. She realized that her culture had undervalued the importance of these memories, and that humans could teach them a new way of seeing the past and the present.